A new patch for PoE 2 just went live, and we gotta talk about it. If you've been playing a magic-based class like Sorceress, or paying attention to popular builds of them, you've probably seen some stuff like this. This is the result of using Cast on Freeze with Comet, and in this case, supported by Echo to duplicate it, and Impetus to increase the energy gain for it. It was effectively setting off comets non-stop. Now, it would eat your mana, so you had to build for that or chug mana flasks, but it could easily be done. But apparently, GG thought it was too much, and at a glance they nerfed it into the ground. Previously, Cast on Freeze would generate 100 energy whenever an enemy was frozen. It required a little over 150 energy to fire Comet, so by adding Impetus, and if you took a few nodes in the passive tree to support it, you could get it over the threshold so that it would cast on every single freeze. I didn't have the passive tree nodes, but I had Impetus, so for me it was every other freeze. Now, instead of 100 energy for every freeze, the tooltip states that it gives 10 energy. Effectively a 10x nerf. But it's not quite as bad as it sounds. Let's read what they put into the patch notes. Trigger gem energy gain was not in the right place, and it was far too easy to use ailments to trigger spells. One problem with the previous system is that if we balanced it to make triggering happen in boss fights, then the triggering would happen far too often during clearing. In order to address this, we are now making monster power part of the calculation for energy gain. This means that it's far easier to trigger skills from unique monsters than it is for normal monsters. But you also hit many more normal monsters when fighting. Another issue was using low-level skills with unconditional ailment applications, such as Flame Wall, to ignite enemies for triggering. In order to make the source of the ignite matter, we are making the energy gain be dependent on the strength of the ignite. We have also rebalanced all energy gain across the board. So the second half of that isn't quite what we're talking about here, and I think that completely makes sense. If you're using a very low-level skill to trigger it, then it shouldn't work and be as effective as it would if you're using a high-level skill. The first half is what's much more important in my opinion, and that's that basically depending on what type of monster you're hitting, now you're going to gain a different amount of energy. So let's test it out and see what this actually looks like. Keep in mind that before the patch, I was getting roughly 96% on every single freeze, whether that be a normal enemy, a rare, or a boss, because I have Impetus but I don't have the passive points. This is some footage from after the patch, and in the top left you can see I'm getting what looks like 3 to 10% of my energy per freeze against normal enemies. On rare mobs, I'm now getting around 40%. But on bosses, I'm getting 100%. Now, again, this is with Impetus giving 40% increased energy. So I went ahead and tested without that as well. Without Impetus, on bosses, I'm only getting 86%. And on rares, I'm getting 33 to 34%. So it's not quite the 10x nerf and doom and gloom that it might look like if you're just looking at the tooltips or reading what people are saying online. And I think that their logic is sound. Like it makes sense what they're saying, that you should get more energy if you're fighting a harder monster, and if you're just plowing through waves of enemies, that it should be less. That said, I do feel like they took it a little bit far, and maybe it could have been toned down just a little less, but I do think that it's still viable, though I'd say there wouldn't really be much reason to run it without Impetus. And it's not going to be something that you're creating your entire build around, but more of a support to come in for extra damage here and there. At least that's my opinion. Let me know what you think though. Was this a bit too much, or do you think it's exactly what it needed? If you enjoyed this video, toss it a like or subscribe to the channel, because I've got more PoE videos coming soon. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.